He slid the envelope across the kitchen table like it was a piece of junk mail. "Just open it," my brother-in-law said. I remember staring at it for a second, thinking it was probably something from the HOA or maybe a late utility bill that had been forwarded to the wrong address. My husband had only been buried 4 days. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten anything real. I was still wearing the same cardigan I'd had on at the funeral because taking it off felt like one more thing I couldn't manage. I opened the envelope, divorce papers, signed by my husband, dated 2 weeks before he died. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in my kitchen with the papers in my hands while my brother-in-law, my husband's younger brother, the one my husband had put through college, the one who had stood beside him at our wedding, watched me read them. And I noticed, because I noticed everything in that moment with this strange, horrible clarity, that he wasn't sad. He was watching me the way you watch a door to see if it's going to open. "There's something else you should know," he said. He told me he and my sister had been together for almost a year. My sister, my little sister, who had called me from the funeral home the morning of the service asking if I needed her to pick up anything on the way, who had held my hand during the burial, who had hugged me for a long time at the reception and said, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I put the papers down on the table very carefully. I looked at him, and I said, "I think you need to leave." He left. But he left the papers. My husband's name was Patrick. He was 41 years old when he died. He had a farm, not a hobby farm, not a weekend project, but a real working farm that had been in his family for 3 generations. 47 acres in central Virginia, just outside of Charlottesville. Cattle, hay, some timber. A farmhouse that needed a new roof but had the kind of bones you can't build anymore. It had been his grandfather's, then his father's, then his. He had been the one to modernize it, to turn it from something that barely broke even into something that actually supported a family. He was proud of it in this quiet, private way that he rarely talked about, but that you could see every time he drove down that long gravel driveway and exhaled. His brother, I'll call him my brother-in-law because I refused to use his name in my own story, had never wanted anything to do with the farm. He had made that clear for years. He thought farming was small. He had an apartment in Richmond, a job in sales, and the kind of competence that people mistake for competence. Patrick used to make excuses for him. He's just still finding himself. He'll grow up. He means well. Patrick was generous like that. Too generous. My sister was 28. She worked as a dental hygienist. She and I had always been close. Or I thought we had been. I was the older one, the responsible one, the one who helped her move twice and co-signed on her first car and talked her through a breakup in her mid-20s that she said nearly destroyed her. I thought we were the kind of sisters who didn't keep secrets from each other. I found out later they had met at our 4th of July party 3 summers before Patrick died. I had introduced them myself. The will was filed with Patrick's attorney, a woman named, well, I'll just call her the attorney. Patrick had never mentioned updating it. I hadn't thought about it, honestly. We were both young. We had talked vaguely about making sure everything was in order someday, the way you talk about cleaning out the garage or getting your cholesterol checked. You mean to get around to it? After my brother-in-law came to the house that day, I called the attorney's office to ask about next steps. The paralegal told me there'd been some recent updates to Patrick's estate documents. She said she couldn't go into detail over the phone, but that I should come in. I drove there alone. I sat in a beige waiting room with a coffee I didn't drink and a magazine from 8 months ago that I pretended to read. The attorney came out and brought me into her office and closed the door. She was matter-of-fact in a kind way. She had seen this before. I could tell. She explained that Patrick had in fact revised his will approximately 6 weeks before his death. He had also changed the beneficiary designations on his life insurance and the title structure on several of the farm's accounts. Everything, the land, the farmhouse, the equipment, the cattle operation, the timber rights, the life insurance, had been restructured so that it passed directly to me outside of probate in a way that would take effect immediately. He had also separately removed his brother as an authorized signatory on the farm's operating accounts. He had done all of this quietly, without telling me, approximately a month and a half before he died in a single-car accident on a county road he had driven 1,000 times. I sat with that for a long moment. Did he say why? I asked. The attorney paused. He said he had concerns, she said carefully, about the integrity of certain relationships. I drove home and sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before I went inside. The accident itself had been ruled exactly that, an accident. A deer, most likely, based on the trajectory. It was the kind of road that curbs without warning. The sheriff's department had closed the investigation within 2 weeks. I had no reason at the time to question it, but I want to be honest. The thought has lived in me since that day in the attorney's office, not as a certainty, not even as a real belief, more like a splinter I can't quite reach. Patrick knew something. He changed his documents in secret. He removed his brother from the accounts. He didn't warn me. And then he died on a road he knew by heart. I don't know what happened on that road. I may never know. What I know is that Patrick saw something coming and he tried to protect me the only way he knew how, without alarming me, without confronting anyone, without making a scene. That was very like him. He was never loud about the things that mattered most. While I was still in the first weeks of grief, before I had told anyone about the papers, my brother-in-law started calling, not to check on me, to ask questions. When would the estate go through probate? Had I spoken to an attorney? Did I know what Patrick had wanted to do with the farm long term? I told him I was still processing. I said I wasn't ready to talk about logistics. I kept my voice flat and polite and gave him nothing. Then my sister called. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was worried about me and that she hoped I was eating and that she loved me. I listened to the message 3 times. I thought about everything she knew and everything she had chosen not to say while she was holding my hand at the cemetery. I didn't call back. A few weeks after the funeral, someone posted a photo on social media. My brother-in-law and my sister at a restaurant in Richmond, dressed up, smiling. He had his arm around her and she was leaning into him and they looked comfortable, like people who had been together for a long time, like people who were done hiding. One of Patrick's cousins texted me the screenshot. Did you know about this? I had known since the kitchen table, but seeing it was different. Seeing it in a photograph with a geotag and a filter and 17 likes made it real in a way that the paperwork hadn't quite managed. That same week, my brother-in-law left a voicemail, not for me, but for the farm's operations manager, a man who had worked for Patrick for 9 years. He left it from his own cell phone, which tells you something about how careful he was being. He introduced himself as Patrick's brother and said he would be taking over management of the property and that the manager should direct any questions to him going forward. He said Patrick had intended for him to have a role in the farm's future. The operations manager called me immediately. He had worked for Patrick long enough to know how Patrick operated, and Patrick had never once mentioned his brother in the context of the farm except to say that he wasn't involved. I asked the manager to document the voicemail and to direct all future communications to me and to my attorney. Then I called my attorney and told her everything. What followed was several weeks of what I can only describe as a slow unraveling. Not of my life, but of theirs. My brother-in-law retained his own attorney and sent a formal letter claiming that Patrick had verbally promised him a stake in the farm. He had no documentation. He had no witnesses who could corroborate anything. What he had was confidence, which is not the same thing as a legal claim, and which does not hold up particularly well in a Virginia probate court. My attorney filed the necessary responses. The estate was clear. The documentation was clean. Patrick had been meticulous. My brother-in-law's attorney withdrew from the case after approximately 3 weeks. I don't know the details of that decision, but I noticed it. Then the money issues started. It turned out that my brother-in-law had, over the prior year, borrowed approximately $30,000 from Patrick in 2 separate installments. Patrick had documented both loans with signed agreements and payment schedules. My brother-in-law had made 2 payments and then stopped. Under the estate, those loans were now collectible debts owed to me. My attorney sent a formal demand. My brother-in-law called me directly for the first time since the kitchen table conversation. He wanted to talk. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said Patrick would have wanted them to work this out as a family. He used the word family 3 times in about 90 seconds. I told him I would be in touch through my attorney and ended the call. My sister came to my house unannounced on a Saturday morning in November. I saw her car in the driveway from the upstairs window, and I stood there for a moment deciding what to do. I went downstairs and opened the door. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping. She said she needed to explain. She said it hadn't been planned, that it had started as nothing, that she had tried to stop it, that she knew how it looked, that she was sorry, that she loved me, that she needed me to understand. She talked for a long time, and I let her talk because I wanted to see what she thought this conversation was. When she stopped, I asked her one question. Did Patrick know? She didn't answer right away. That was its own kind of answer. I think he suspected, she finally said. I nodded. I told her I appreciated her coming. I told her I needed time. And then I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a while after that. I thought about Patrick updating his will in secret, about him removing his brother from the accounts, about him carrying that knowledge alone for 6 weeks and still showing up to dinner every night and asking me about my day and sleeping beside me without saying a word. I don't know if he was protecting me from the grief of it or if he was still trying to figure out what to do. I'll never be able to ask him. What I know is that he made sure I would be okay, in the most practical, concrete, irreversible way he knew how. The legal process concluded in December. The farm was fully in my name. The debt collection proceeding was settled for a reduced amount after my brother-in-law's attorney, a new one, negotiated a payment plan that stretched over 2 years. My attorney told me it was the best realistic outcome given the circumstances, and I told her I could live with it. My brother-in-law and my sister moved in together in the spring. I found this out through mutual friends, not through either of them. I have not spoken to my sister since November. I don't know if I will. That particular wound is still too close for me to know what I think about it. The operations manager is still running the farm. He came to me shortly after everything resolved and asked carefully what I wanted to do going forward. I told him I wasn't ready to sell. I told him I wanted to learn. He nodded like that was what he'd expected me to say. I have been learning. It is harder than I thought and more grounding than I expected. There is something about managing land that has been in someone's family for 3 generations that makes you feel connected to something larger than your own loss. I'm not sure Patrick anticipated that part, but I think he would have liked knowing it. I want to say something about the divorce papers because I still think about them. Patrick filed them 2 weeks before he died. I don't believe he truly intended to go through with the divorce. I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and the attorney wouldn't speculate, and I have stopped trying to reason it out. What I know is that he changed everything else to protect me. The farm, the insurance, the accounts. He went to real trouble to make sure that whatever happened, I would be standing on solid ground. That doesn't read like a man who was leaving. It reads like a man who was afraid but still, in every way that mattered, on my side. I signed those papers because I was in shock and because I didn't know what else to do in that moment. It didn't matter in the end. Virginia law, the timing, the way the estate was structured, there were several reasons why the divorce filing ultimately had no bearing on anything. My attorney explained it to me and I nodded and understood about 40% of it. The point is, it didn't matter. He had already made sure of that. I still drive the farm road every morning. There's a stretch of it just before the east pasture where you come over a small rise and you can see the whole property spread out below you. The fence lines, the old barn, the farmhouse with its imperfect roof. In the early morning with the light coming in sideways, it looks the way things look in photographs people take to prove that something was beautiful. I pull over sometimes and just sit there. I am 32 years old. My husband is gone. My sister is living a life I don't recognize. My brother-in-law got almost nothing and is paying back what he stole in installments. And I am here, on 47 acres that Patrick spent his whole adult life building, that he quietly and carefully placed in my hands before he left. I don't have a word for what that feels like. It isn't happiness. It isn't peace exactly. It's something more like being trusted with something you didn't know you were strong enough to hold, and then finding out that you are. That's the thing about quiet people. They show you what they think of you not in what they say, but in what they make sure you have when they're gone. I think about that every morning when I come over that rise and see the land he loved. And I stay. I used to think that what you deserve and what you get are 2 completely separate things. That the world just hands out outcomes randomly, and the best you can do is brace for whatever comes. Patrick changed that for me, not by anything he said out loud. He was never that kind of man, but by what he did in those 6 weeks before he died when he knew something was wrong and chose to act on it quietly, carefully, and completely alone. He didn't confront his brother. He didn't come to me in a panic. He sat with what he knew, figured out what he could actually control, and then he protected me in the most concrete way available to him. Through documents, through attorneys, through account structures I didn't even know existed. That took something I've spent a long time trying to name. It wasn't just love. It was a kind of moral clarity. Knowing right from wrong clearly enough that even under fear, even under whatever suspicion he was carrying, he didn't blur the line. He didn't retaliate, he didn't scheme, he just made sure the right thing would happen, and then he let it go. His brother had the opposite. He had confidence without that clarity. He walked into my house 4 days after the funeral and slid an envelope across the table like he had already won something. He called the farm's operations manager from his own cell phone. He hired an attorney to claim a verbal promise with no witnesses and no paperwork. Every move he made assumed that boldness was the same as being right, that if you act like something belongs to you, eventually it will. That's not intelligence. That's a performance of it. And it falls apart the moment it meets something real. The thing I keep coming back to is this. Darren didn't lose because karma is some invisible force that punishes bad people. He lost because he built his entire plan on things that weren't solid. Assumptions. A dead man's supposed word. Access codes he'd already been removed from. The universe didn't reach down and take anything from him. He just had nothing real to stand on, and when it mattered, that became obvious. My sister is a different kind of grief. She had everything she needed to make a different choice, and she didn't make it. I think about that sometimes when I'm driving the farm road in the early morning and the light is still coming in sideways. I think about the years I spent being the person she called when things got hard, and I think about her standing at the cemetery, holding my hand saying I'm so sorry while knowing everything she knew. That takes a certain kind of willingness to live with yourself that I genuinely don't understand. What I know is that I'm still here. I'm learning the cattle operation. I'm Robert what Patrick knew instinctively about this land. It is hard in ways I didn't expect and meaningful in ways I couldn't have predicted. I think that's what it looks like when someone trusts you with something real. Not because you were ready for it, but because they believed you would find a way to become ready. You don't have to be fearless to keep going. Patrick wasn't fearless. He was scared enough to rewrite his will in secret and remove his brother from the accounts without saying a word to anyone. But he kept going anyway. He did the hard, unglamorous, legally precise thing, and he did it alone, and he did it right. I'm trying to do the same. One morning at a time. One fence line, one ledger, one decision at a time. That's the only version of strength I've ever seen that actually holds.